We are in the startup world, and it's always good to listen to stories, anecdotes, and experiences from those who dreamt big. And who better to chair this panel than somebody who has seen it all? Please join me in welcoming the session chair, Ravi Gururaj, founder and CEO, QikPod. I'd like to request all of you to please give him a big round of applause. And I'd like to request him to introduce the panelists to us. This is the last session on the pursuit of innovation, scaling beyond pretty prototypes.
Good evening. So we're going to have an interesting session for you all. We're going to meet two startup founders in very different spaces, B2B and truly B2C. I'd like to invite on stage Dalvir, Suri, who's from Dunzo. Dalvir. I think he's just co-founder. I think he wears multiple hats at Dunzo. And I think we'll do a show of hands of how many people have used Dunzo before. I think Zainul is getting wired up. Zainul is with Tricog. It's a medical device company that builds an ECG-like device, which I'll allow him to tell us more about. It's Zainul Charbiwala. I just want to make sure I got that right. Welcome, Zainul. Thank you. So I'm going to have each of you basically just introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, a little bit about the company, and where you're at, and then we'll talk about all the path you've taken to get where you are, right, and kind of some of the pains and opportunities, right?
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so hi, good evening. My name is Zainul. Been part of the journey of Tricog. We're about 4.5 years old. My background is I'm an EE engineer. Did my undergrad, then the post-graduation at IIT Bombay. Moved to the US, did my PhD. Came back to India, joined IBM Research, stayed with them for about 3 years. That's when I met my co-founder, who happens to be a cardiologist. And he told me this interesting story of a 40-year-old gentleman who had chest pain, goes to a clinic, gets an ECG done, didn't get his diagnosis on time, wasted 4 hours before he got his surgery done, which is an angioplasty. And he explained to me how this problem is not just anecdotal, but it's the statistics behind it. It's a very large problem. I got hooked, and I tried going about solving the problem. It's been about 4.5 years now. I'll go into more detail about the problem and the product a little bit later, but we've scaled to about 23 states across the country, 12 countries around the world, 1.5 million, 1.8 million patients in total. And it's been a great journey. It's love to talk about it more.
Great. So we're going to come back to find out how a PhD from UCLA, masters from IIT, just throws up a job and jumps in with a doctor he meets to run a startup, right? And coming from IBM Research as well, right?
Yes.
So Dalvir, tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure.
And you guys have a lot in common.
We do.
They both worked at IBM and quit IBM. So I hope there's nobody in IBM in the room. We're not advocating for that, but.
So yeah, Dalvir, Suri. I come from Bombay, did my engineering in Sardar Patel, sometime in 2009. Joined IBM straight after college, worked as an engineer over there. Moved to IBM Bangalore for an information security stint for about a year and a half. And that's when coming to Bangalore, just realized that startup world is what it is, how we can build products and then stuff, right? We started off by building a lot of products for growing startups in Bangalore. That was that was a company that we started. Did that for 3 years, wherein we scaled the company from like around 4-member people to around 80 odd folks running business. That's when I bumped into Kabir. He had this idea about Dunzo. The idea was very simple. We all have a limited amount of time in our lives, but so much to do. Every day when you wake up, you create a to-do list and you try to complete it. But for some odd reason, you're never able to complete it, at least at that time. And I'm like, yes, this is a problem that we should solve. At that point, we didn't know how to solve it, right? And that started our journey wherein I remember he had a car, Santro, where he used to roam around MG Road with a number, WhatsApp number, and people used to ask him to get stuff from any place in the Bangalore, and he would just deliver it, right? So there was a problem to solve. The problem was convenience, right? Where people wanted stuff, they didn't have time, and we could give that time back to the user, right? That intrigued me. Fast forward in 2015, we were being approached from a lot of investors, and they were very happy with what we were doing, and that's when I started, when I jumped ship and I said, okay, let's build this together. At Dunzo, initial years went about building the entire engineering stack, the entire product, to then moving to a more business and a strategic role where I'm looking at cities, new initiatives, and a lot of new projects.
Great. So maybe we should ask the audience how many people have used the Tricog product. Put your hand up.
Yeah, I probably know it's
Okay.
They probably don't know.
Yeah, they probably don't know, and I'm glad that you're not used
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
And how many of you all have tried Dunzo? Maybe you can,
Oh my God.
so it's a good good
fantastic.
traction. Now tell us a little bit about that. I just did that. This is B2B. It's unfair to you.
Right.
It's like, but tell us a little bit about the Dunzo traction. And what you're doing more than just deliveries now.
Right. So we always started from the consumer as a center for us, right? And we went to the consumer asking, what is it that you need? And we'll go ahead and basically solve it for you, right? And at that point, we were not thinking that we'll do vertical or we'll go horizontal. We were like very focused on the consumer. What do you want to get done? We'll do it for you. That started our journey. And we just realized that, yes, the initiator is the consumer, but then there's a lot of things that we need to solve. Primarily, logistics is a big problem that needs to be solved, right? And at the core of it, we are a logistics company. We are building a lot of verticals on top of our logistics, right? So we started unlocking different categories. People started using us for sending deliveries from point A to point B in the city. The real interesting part started when they started doing commerce on the platform, right? Wherein practically you could send anyone in any store at any time of the day, be it 4 a.m. or be it 4 p.m. and get something delivered to your house, right? And that's what unlocked the power, right? So today Dunzo operates in 3 large verticals, I would say. There are 3 C's: courier, which is pick up and drop; commerce, which is buy; and commute. A natural extension to pick up and drop was once a user, he just pinged us saying, hey, you're going to drop this package from point A to point B, why don't you just drop me as well? And that just, right? So it's a natural extension, right? I mean, so Dunzo, yes, we basically operate in these 3 verticals at this moment, solving these 3 problems for the user.
Got it. So we come back to the rest of the journey. So tell us a little bit about Tricog. How did you guys decide this is where you're going, and how did you meet your founder, your co-founder?
So it's an interesting story. I was at IBM at the time, and my co-founder, who happens to be a cardiologist, he was looking for a tech founder. And he was doing the rounds at Microsoft and IBM and looking for people who would be interested in actually, working on a problem like this. And it so happened that someone at Microsoft knew me and connected me to him. And at first, actually, I didn't understand the problem. And it took me, I'd say, a good part of 2 years to actually follow in his footsteps. I would shadow him in his OPD, in his operation theater, in the cath lab, and actually understand why this problem exists. And about 2 years later, I was convinced we actually did. Just to go back to that story, there was an interesting anecdote where we were talking to a mentor, and this is something that I think all startup founders have. They have these mentors, and he said, all of this is great. You've got this fine, nice presentation. Can you show me that it actually works? And so we took 2 weeks to build a prototype, and we gave it to 5 clinics and diagnostic labs, and we did 300 patients in those 30 days, in 1 month. And from the 300 patients, it turned out that we caught 2 live heart attacks just by doing nothing. Wow. Like we were just building this prototype just to see what would happen. And at the end of that, these 5 labs were unwilling to give the devices back. And they were like, what do we need to pay to keep this on? Right? That's when the switch goes off and says, look, this is a business. This is something that needs to be solved. And it's a good problem to solve, societally very impactful. There's money to be made. And there's data, there's opportunity to do deep tech. So that's really the reason someone from IBM would jump ship.
And there are 4 you founders, right?
And we have 4 founders.
So tell us a little bit of the org structure. I'd like both of you all to answer that. You all have 4 founders too.
Yes.
So how do you all divide up work? How do you structure both for initial success, then scale, and then even international growth in some cases?
Right. So in our case, the CEO is Dr. Charit, who's the cardiologist, and he leads pretty much the entire medical operations and the medical team, and all of investor-facing relations. I'm CTO and COO, and so I manage much of the tech stack, but also a lot of the business operations in the company, sales, service, administration, all of that stuff. And then we have 2 more founders, one that handles all of the data science and algorithms work, Chief Algorithms Officer, who's got a PhD himself from the US, like 20 years out, signal processing expert, that sort of person. And then there's one other guy who's also ex-GCC, is Microsoft, and who leads all of the software and cloud and mobility aspects of the company. So that's the 4 founders, where some tech gets done from some parts, some other tech gets done from another part.
Got it. You all are building a hardware product.
Yes.
What's the cycle time like there?
So
what's the experience been like?
I skipped a little bit in the intro. So the product is actually 3 parts. So there's one part which goes into a doctor's clinic, which is in cloud-connected ECG machine. So what we do is we actually buy off-the-shelf ECG machines from tier 1 vendors like GE or Philips or something like that, and then we augment it with our own IoT device that cloud connects it. And so that's the hardware piece. And then the second piece is in the cloud, we run our own algorithms that processes this data and then comes up with annotations and a recommendation for what disease it has found in the ECG data. And the third bit is that we have a dedicated team of doctors sitting out of our office in Bangalore. So there's about 20 of them. They're 24/7, so they come in shifts just like a hospital setup. And they look at this data in real time, and they finalize the report coming from the algorithm, and they send it out. And our current TAT is about 5 to 6 minutes.
Got it.
So it's a very, very quick turnaround, and really the intent is no heart attack, no MI, what's the medical term for a heart attack, should be missed, right? And we need to be able to save those 20 minutes, that half an hour, that can really impact in a way a life and death situation.
All right. So that's very impressive. So you're building the hardware, you're building the software, the cloud software, and the services with an SLA of what, 4 or 5 minutes or
Yes.
whatever. All the full stack in some sense. You said you were in 250 cities in India?
Yes.
But the team is not that big, right?
So the team is about 125, 130 people sitting out of Bangalore. We are in 250 cities in India across 23 states. In about 1,600 locations, and a few countries in Southeast Asia and in Africa as well.
And everything's done remotely in the cloud.
And everything's done remotely in the cloud. It's a completely digital solution. Right. So yeah, we need to ship out a product, which is a hardware product, but then the actual data and the processing of the data is completely virtual. Yeah. The service is virtual.
So Dalvir, in your case, it's very simple, right, Dunzo?
Well, yeah. So, I think one thing which I would say is having co-founders just helps a lot, right? And we can possibly bulldoze a lot of problems together, right? So initially, I think, so I'll let you know how we met. Like, so I told you about me and Kabir, right? But then what happened was when we closed our fundraising, we met this another awesome team who were actually building something similar and was trying to raise funds with Bloom. And Bloom just got us in touch saying that you both seem to be solving the same problem. Why don't you guys just merge and figure it out?
And Bloom, for the benefit of the audience, is the investor that
is the investor,
actually invested in both of you.
In both of us, right?
Bloom is an investor for us.
And that's all coincidental.
It's all coincidental. So we just met, spoke about, and we already knew that we understood the operational side of the business very well. I knew that we need to build a lot of tech as well. Mukund and Ankur, they were attacking it from the tech side and trying to automate from there. And we just thought that this is like, we should just go at it together. That's how we met. We started. For the first 2.5, 3 years, 3 of us, we would just be owning different parts of engineering, right? And would just be building products, shipping it out, testing. We knew our 2-year roadmap at that time, right? Kabir, on the other hand, was looking at a lot of operations and investor relations, etc. Right? Fast forward now, it's a three-sided market for us. So how we look at it is we have base as the logistics layer and probably the platform infra, etc. But then we have the user, we have the merchant, and then we have the delivery partners, right? It's practically three different companies working together, though having different goals, but at the end it merges and needs to solve together, right? So currently, Mukund looks at, and Mukund and Ankur look at engineering, Kabir is busy with investor relations and a lot of other stuff, and I largely, as I said, I look at a lot of business operations and new initiatives in the company.
Got it.
Right?
And how often do you all push new features? I'd ask both of you all the question, in just product development cycles.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of our product is there's no debate when it comes to testing something out. We can just test it out within 2 days, right? And I can just push it out to, let's say, X percentage of users to get some significant results and see whether it works or not works.
So the company is practically an A/B test.
It's an A/B test, right? I mean, we can practically, and this happens, right? So how we structure right now is there is some stable part of the product and a roadmap that we have, but then there's this team which is very nimble and which just keeps on hacking stuff day in, day out, and we just go about testing it out, right? And seeing results and seeing if we want to dump it or we want to scale it or not.
Got it. Yeah. So, we come to questions from the audience, so if you can just line up any questions you have, glad to kind of take them. If there's somebody who can run a mic around, get a couple of mics out, just raise your hand and we'd be glad to come by. In the meantime, let me ask questions on team building.
Right.
What has been your experience there, especially building tech and building ops?
Right. I think right from the beginning, we were sure that, I think he would also concur that the team is very important to how you succeed, right? And you really need smart and motivated people to tackle certain problems, right? And engineering has been difficult, and I think it's always a difficult in this ecosystem, but we've been very picky and choosy for the first at least 100 odd colleagues that we want to work with, right?
Got it.
Right from even the person who works directly with the delivery partners. I have basically gotten and interviewed, I've basically onboarded the top 50 delivery partners myself, right? It's really important if you to green that culture in the system. So I think the top 150 crucial hires are really important for you, right? The next part is what kind of people you want to basically say, right? And someone who comes with an experience always helps, right? Who's worked at certain problem and he knows ins and outs, because it just reduces your cycle of learning. You don't need to relearn a lot of stuff, and you can basically work on his understanding and build on top of it. That always helps, right?
So in your case, how have you all gone about building? How big is the team?
It's about 130 people right now.
And just to give context to the audience, how you all funded and how much you all raised?
So we've raised 3 rounds of funding, a seed, pre-A, what's called a pre-A investment, and then a Series A, and about $7.5 million US in total.
Got it. And just for completeness,
we just raised our last round about 25 mil.
25 million.
Yeah.
And you had the Google round before that,
Yeah.
Where you raised from Google
Right.
Capital. Okay.
Right.
Very good. Okay, and your team
Right.
building.
So I think for us, what happened was that early on there was a lot of, so as I said, we did a quick prototype right in the beginning. We realized that the quick prototype was actually good enough to ship to customers, and that allowed us to get a lot of customer feedback very early. And so we took, our first set of customers, like our first 10 customers, and each of these customers is a doctor's office. It's either a clinic or a hospital or a diagnostic center. And each of these is, we had about 10 of them early on, and then we built 10, 40, 100, and then went to 250. It's by the time only that we went to about 400 or so that we had a proper production ready piece of hardware, and that's, I think we were already 18 months out into that. So what that did was that allowed us to build the product out both in hardware and software to be able to really meet customer needs as we went along. Because this is, just like Dunzo, the product did not exist before in this market, right? And I think that's characteristic of all startups, is that this is a new concept. This is something that hasn't been done before, which means you have to educate the customer on what this really is and why you need it. And then once they realize, then they want more of it. And then you've got to meet that demand as well. So that allows us, that what that did was that the whole prototyping cycle, although we're in the medical industry, so the medical industry is very far more regulated, far more conservative, but we were able to do a lot of the, I'll not call it A/B testing, but a lot of the software iterations on the back end, on the cloud, on what the app should look like, how many buttons it should have, things like that. The core tech behind the algorithms that process the data and then that use the doctor's service to be able to create the report, that stays locked down all the time. It's ironclad in a sense. So anything that goes in and out of that repository of code actually goes through 3 levels of code review, and only then we'll go through testing and we'll push it out at 4 a.m. in the morning when there's no load, that sort of thing. We'll test it when the load's going up and things like that. So that part of the company is very hard to get into and get out of. But otherwise, there's lots of other fluid parts, which are what the web interface should look like and things like that, and that's where we do a lot of our
much more iterative.
Iterative as well.
Very good. So let's go to some questions. I hope there are some questions in the audience. Please raise your hand if there are. We got one, a lady up here. Could you get the mic to her, please? I'll come to you next.
Hi, I'm Anshu from H&R Blog. I must say it was very fascinating to hear about you all, and it was inspiring as well. So what I did get is that you both had ideas, a product which did not exist. You identified a need and you helped to solve it, which was instrumental for your success. But in Bangalore, there are so many startups, and a lot of them have a new product, a new idea, but a lot of them fail. What do you think was that edge you had, or that extra thing that really helped you make it a success? I mean, of course, the product itself, yes, but do you think there was something else that contributed to this?
So let me add to that. How many near-death experiences have you all had?
Many.
Many.
So the fact that you're here is a game of survivor.
I mean, literally.
No, but tell us a little bit. Let's say Dunzo. You guys were at a point where it was, you needed to raise around, and then literally Google was almost the last one in line, right?
Yes.
And you you got that, and then you're where you are today.
Right. So I'll like to answer that. I think, and I speak to a lot of founders and budding founders who want to basically try something out, right? I think one thing is that you need to try it, right? And when I say try it, it's not on a piece of paper. You need to go out and basically test out and actually feel if what you're building is truly going to, make someone's life better, right? I think that was what helped us, because every day in the morning we were on the ground and we were running tasks for our consumers. And every day we just learned something new. I mean, to be honest, this product was built by the consumers, not by us. I mean, the consumers told us what they wanted, and we just went about building it, right? I think that is really important. So a lot of people, they think about flows and workflows and charts and what will happen. You need to go out there and just test it out, right? And you will fail. I mean, you will always fail, right? That's not an issue, but you will at least learn something new, right? And the second thing which I think is really important is persistence, right? You need to go out there every day and try to prove it, right? And you need to give it all in, right? I mean, it's either 0 or 100. It can't be in the middle that you're doing something else and doing it. I think that's very difficult to work in at least in our case, right? So I think these two are really, really important. Understanding your consumer very well, and that will only happen once you keep pushing and trying stuff out, right? And that's going to help you.
Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I think, also just like Ravi said, being in the startup ecosystem, you get to hear a lot of interesting ideas, meet a lot of interesting people who have these ideas, and they come to you and say, this is something interesting, and you also find it interesting. But then you ask the question, have you spoken to a customer? Like, no, right? And I think number one is get to your customer as quickly as possible, right? That 15-day prototype, that comment from our mentor allowed us to do that very quickly.
Yeah.
And so listen to your customer, he's probably right.
Yeah.
Yeah. In our case, we've got a doctor on the team who's the CEO, domain expert. He will tell you the number of times he's been wrong, right? But as far as the actual product, for our case, the product that he came up with, that was spot on, and we've been working on that core product for like the last 4+ years now. But there's so many more variations of that that are specific to cardiologists or to diabetologists or to other kinds of physicians, where we just have to go and we've got to experiment and we try figure it out. I think that's one. The second, I think, big thing is team. I think it's have the right team up front. Sometimes it looks like this is overkill, and I think that's absolutely not true. The number of things that will go wrong as you start to scale. And in my case, when I was speaking to Dr. Charit, I found that this is a really simple problem. An ECG comes in, you process it, you give it to a doctor, they report it, and it sends out. So what's so hard in doing this, right? And I realized that the number of things that you have to get right, because the doctor, your customer at the other end, absolutely depends on you getting it right 100% of the time. And so this just can't fail. You've got a box that got a SIM card in it. We had an outage from a service provider that took 600 boxes out for 4 hours. Like, our lines were ringing. I'm like, I don't know what to do. The guy on P's end says, I don't know why this is down for you. Our network is up. This is not a billing problem. This is not a configuration problem. Like, yes, it happens. And so you've got to deal with things like this operationally. And so in the devices that we send out, because we don't have centers that have their own Wi-Fi, and that's the reality here, we've got to ship pretty much a cell phone connection in every device that we send out, and that causes issues that we need to then solve.
I hope she remains inspired after all those responses. Jump in.
Yeah.
So let's take the next
Hi,
one.
I'm Sandeep from Wismatic. The question is for Ravi, is for you. Since you have seen both sides of the business world, being in startups and working for corporates, so why do you think that the speed of innovation is always, happening in the startup world is always has outpaced and what is happening in the corporate world? So
Right.
is it because corporates do try setting up innovation labs, but they definitely they don't get the results sometimes. So
Right. So, I joined corporates mostly because my companies were acquired. So one was Network Commerce and the other was Citrix, So in that context, and Intel. But when I speak to large companies, I say you need the nimbleness of startups. When I speak to startups, I say you need the scale and the rigor of operation
and the
of a large company. So, I think both bring different things to the table. Large companies have brand, they have credibility, they have capital, they have resources, they have footprint, right? When they do get the engine going, they can go really fast sometimes, right? And I think it's always, in my mind, when you're a large company and you have a big revenue line to protect, it's not so easy to say, let's just junk that and go do something new, right? Because you still have to feed the troops, you still have to meet especially if you're a public company, there are numbers to meet, right? All of these companies that are startups, as soon as they become public and they'll have exactly the same problems. Let me say, they'll slow down, they'll have to kind of hit some of those numbers, right? But I think, fundamentally, I think just to answer your question, I think they prototype and go to production faster because they don't necessarily have an embedded customer base to protect. They don't necessarily.
And they don't have anything to lose. It's a question of
I would say
survival.
they have their time to lose, but they don't necessarily. They're not kind of. They don't have legacy to protect, right?
The company's at a stage where the consumer is okay if you go wrong, to be
Right.
honest, right? I mean, they're very.
I think the cost of, let's say, a single failure in your case is much lower.
Yes,
In his
exactly.
case, it's much higher.
It's much
So
higher, yeah.
that's why he's doing 3 reviews of code. You might do 1 and push.
Yeah.
So I think even within startups, they go faster, sometimes slower, sometimes, right? I think that's the biggest thing. Is the ability to prototype and move fast in today's world, be able to push to a customer and get feedback. Larger companies have brands to protect, they have to do it through, and that's why they use accelerators, they use other proxies to go fast, to learn and experiment and have sandpits that don't impact their core business, right? So that you can do the same thing, but do it with less risk.
Yeah. In the context of GCCs, maybe the collaboration which is happening.
Are there any other questions? Can we go one more there? Now we come back to you, madam.
So this is Dalvir. Hey, Dalvir. So large logistics companies, even though they have the infrastructure, they have not really eyed the market that you are capitalizing now. Don't you see a risk in the future in case if they occupy your market later on if they change the strategy and so on?
Sure. I mean, as I see it, I think everyone who's working in logistics will some way enter this market today or tomorrow, right? We always knew that. It was never a case that we are going to basically we are afraid of something or someone will come in, right? I mean, the market is big enough for a lot of companies to basically come and build their own stuff. That is not the differentiator always. If a large fleet and a lot of capital is never a differentiator. It's what kind of service you provide. How, I think this is lost. Yeah. What value your user sees in using that app. Every time he thinks about a problem, how does he think about Dunzo or does he think about something else? I think that is something that you need to focus on rather than thinking about everything else. Sure, I mean, Swiggy is going to come into this, Amazon is going to come into this. There are a lot of companies who come, and they should, because as a business it makes sense, right? We just need to deliver on what we offer to the consumer, right? So yeah.
I think not only the logistics companies, but Uber, Ola, everybody could come. Swiggy, Zomato, all of those. So I think and new startups could come. The next Dunzo could come too.
Absolutely.
So I think as a startup founder, you're not really worried about the competition. You're just trying to stay ahead and keep moving forward.
Exactly.
Right? So there's a question in the back. Please, you have a mic? If you could raise your hand so the mics could get to you if anybody else has a question.
Hi Dalvir, my name is Vaishali and I work for Societe Generale. Okay. Really nice to meet you. I love your product. I use it almost 5 days a week, including this morning. So my question is that
give her a coupon code, come on.
She doesn't need one.
So your model is based on trust.
Yes.
Because we don't have any kind of insurance or nothing that assures us that it's going to reach in safely. So how do you manage that with the partners? Because they are people who are probably doing other jobs as well, and though I use it so often, I never see the same face. How do you ensure, and I don't know why I blindly trust Dunzo, but how do you ensure the safety of the product?
I think we were just talking about it backstage.
Okay.
From the beginning, I think we knew that if you're building something like this, we need to control users' anxiety. Right, and for that we need to build transparency in the system. If things are going right, yes, they are going right, we'll need to tell you. If things are going wrong, we need to tell you that things are going wrong. I think that is very core to at least our business. If a driver has faced some issues, yes, we are upfront saying that, hey, something went wrong, but don't worry, we'll fix it, right? I think that touch point is very important, and I think us hand-holding it in some manner, maybe operationally, maybe through tech, has really helped us build that trust, right? The second part of your question is how do I mitigate those trusts, right, with insurance and everything else. I think initially none of the companies or the ecosystem didn't understand this model, right? And today companies are coming forward and wanting to work with us. How do we mitigate these, right? How do I build an insurance into the system, right? What happens if someone meets an accident probably, right, or something like that, right? And so those are, we are basically building those at the moment with a lot of the third-party vendors, right? The third part of it is we focus really, like, to a very great extent on the user quality, and not just the end consumer, but also the partner and the merchant, right? A lot of impetus is given on training, retraining, even if a slightest of mistake happens, right? So I think that needs to be embedded in the culture, into the process, right? As to if you see something is going wrong and there is at scale, you need to fix it, right? So I think that we have been doing right from day one. And that's why even though on the app you would not see if there's an insurance or not, but you still trust us, right? I think that's very core. To build, at least for a B2C business, that's really core. For a B2B, I think it will be more about the stability and yeah.
Thank you. Just one more part. Do you have an upcoming loyalty program?
She's using you 5 days a week.
Makes sense.
We do actually. I mean, as I said, we I don't know if you know, we did have a loyalty program for some small time. It was like a subscription program, right? It didn't work, simply, but it was something that we just went about testing for a week. We built it in a week, tested out for a month, it didn't work, and we just said, okay, we have this piece of thing, probably it will not work at this scale. But we are constantly trying out things and innovating on that. But yeah, sure, royalty will come.
Got it.
Thank
So
you.
a couple of last questions while we kind of wrap up this session. On the regulatory front, policy,
Right.
you're startups, you're innovating, you're doing it in the medical space, you're doing it in the consumer space. What's your perspective there?
So I think things are moving, but there's realization amongst the core market, amongst at least the general audience, that this is the need of the hour, right? So when I explain them something or talk about it, they said yes, this should work, right? But when it comes to the policy makers and builders, I think there's a lot of innovation or a lot of structure needs, and the perception needs to change over there, right? Like, why is bike taxi only available in 12 states in India? Why not in all the states, right? It's the same bike, it's the same person, right? I think once we unlock these, we could probably see a big boom and a lot of new ideas coming in and emerging, right? I think that slows down the process a bit. I do understand that they need to, I mean, for example, for a transportation department, it's very important for them to think about all the possible outcomes, but they need to fast track it, right? So we are working with them closely, trying out and figuring out how we can solve this, and if they need some data, if they need to test something out, we are there to do that with them. So we're open to that. But yeah,
But to be candid, you'll have not had not much friction, right? You've been able to run most of your stuff.
Most of it, right?
Other than liquor at night or whatever, and this bike thing, right? But the bike is a state-governed topic.
Like, for example, if given a chance, I would want to test out drones tomorrow.
Sure. So drones but there's a drone policy there.
It's not
for delivery of a sandwich to your home.
Absolutely, right? I mean, these are some things that you can really innovate and test out and do a lot of. I'm sure there are a lot of problems that can arise, but you would only know when you do it.
Great. Zainul, what about your regulatory environment? It's very, very structured, right?
Yes. So I think medical regulatory is far more structured, far more conservative. I think the world over, it's even more than what we see in India, I think. And as I'd say, an emerging economy, there's lots of innovation that we have been able to do in a way. We think of ourselves as made in India, built for the world. And a lot of the stuff that we have done, we couldn't have done back in the US. We've got Japanese investors, and they've asked us to start the service in Japan, and we've been at the process for the last 9 months already now, right? And we are probably at the end of this year we're going to launch in Japan. So it does take a long time to you go over some of the regulatory, I'll call them hurdles, but I think they're there for a reason. And a lot of the times that we've seen and gone through that process, we realize that yes, from a regulatory standpoint, they're good. I'm distinguishing that from policy. Policy is different from regulatory. Right. And certification for devices and services. The problem is that since our product in itself is also very new in concept, there's an AI element. The algorithm changes over time. How the service is delivered. None of that actually is covered under regulatory today, and so that's where the confusion is from a policy and regulatory standpoint. There are only a few countries in the world that actually have good open regulatory policies for things like this, where there's new concepts that come about. I think the FDA has just opened it up with things like the Apple and Apple Watch and things like that. But Singapore is one, and Singapore is actually very progressive in terms of how they deal with medical regulatory stuff.
Right. And so you're actually able to move as fast in India as anywhere else in the world, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think
so it could be a hotbed for innovation in the medical space.
Absolutely.
And it's a regulated space everywhere in the world, rightfully so, but at the same time, you're not really thinking. So last question, tell us a little bit, do you have a question in the audience?
Yes, right here. Hi Dalvir, I'm Sindhu from
we'll take one last question.
Society General. On a lighter note, what is the craziest thing Dunzo has had to deliver so far?
Okay, so what's the crazy?
I mean, many, right?
Come on,
I mean,
Dalvir. Be honest.
Pick one.
I mean, I'll tell you crazy I mean, we thought that this will not happen, but there was a couple who were traveling from Chennai and they via train. They were passing Bangalore, and this lady is pregnant, and suddenly on the way she has a craving to eat donuts, right? And so the guy, he jumps on the app and he basically says that I'm going to reach Bangalore station at this time. My train is going to stand there for like 10 minutes. Can you get me Dunkin' Donuts? So we said, yes, sure, we can do it, but you'll have to come out to the station. And we actually delivered it, right? So things like this, right? I mean, where a user just wants it and we made it happen, right? And there were like 3 people on the task making sure and coordinating with him, but we made it. That we saved his life.
Excellent.
the guy's life.
Very good.
That was funny. Thank you.
So thank you very much.